Hey guys, Sebastian Guerra here, president and partner here at Guerra Wealth Advisors, where we help families get to the point where work becomes an option and not an obligation. Today we're going to be talking about the 6 risks during retirement. I think that one of the biggest challenges with a lot of people is that they have some money saved up. They have probably savings, 401ks, retirement accounts, all these different things, and now they want to pull the trigger and they want to retire, but do they have enough money? And not only do they have enough money, but what are the risks that can destroy their wealth during retirement? So if you really enjoy these subjects, we put out videos on a weekly basis where we talk about taxes, retirement, investing. And so if you really care a lot about your money, you want to make sure that you subscribe. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Just a couple weeks ago, I ended up having a meeting with a family. They came in pretty arrogantly because they had about $2.5 million saved up for their retirement. And they're like, well, I got over $2 million. Well, that should be enough to make sure that my money lasts me throughout all of my retirement. And so after we built out a solid retirement income plan and we built out a budget for them, we started noticing that they're going to be fine. They have enough money saved up. And if everything goes well, they're not going to be running out of money. But that's not so much the question. The question is, what are the risks that can cause the money to run out if things don't go according to plan? So we're going to first start off with something called longevity risk. And what does that mean? Well, that means what happens if you live too long? And it sounds like dumb because you would say, why would you want to die young? But the problem is that if you die too late in life, in other words, you live until your late 90s or even age 100, well, that's a concerning thing when it comes to money. Because if you're planning on retiring at, say, age 60, and you probably are going to live until age 100, then do you have enough money to last you for 40 years and make sure that you're keeping up with inflation? So longevity is something that needs to be factored in. And the way you can think about these things is ask yourself, well, how long did your parents live? Or maybe siblings? What's the expected longevity, especially? Are you healthier than your mom? Are you healthier than your dad? Because if you are healthier than your dad and your dad passed away at age 90, there's a high likelihood that you're going to live past age 90. And if you want to retire at age 60, then you want to make sure that your money lasts you at least until your late 90s. I think one of the big problems that people run into is that once they get to this later stage of life and they run out of money, now they got to go run to their children and run to their family for financial help. So you want to make sure that you ask yourself, hey, what's my expected life expectancy so that I know that I can plan for that, and just in case I live a long life, I have enough money stored up. And the second is inflation risk. You see, what happens if tomorrow gas prices are $100 a gallon? What happens if tomorrow a 12-pack of eggs are $50? You see, if these things happen in the future, then how is that going to affect your money, your investments? And is your money going to potentially run out a lot faster if expenses skyrocket? Imagine right now, like you think about your vehicle, maybe you drive a $40,000 car or a $60,000 car, but if you stop and thought about 30 years ago, a car like that one, what would it cost 30 years ago? And it's probably like 1/4 or 1/5 of the cost that it costs today. You see, the average car in America today is almost $45,000, $46,000. But if you go back 20 years ago, the average car in America was about $20,000. And this is why it's very important that you think about inflation as it pertains to your retirement. Because if you're 62 years old and today you can live on, say, only $8,000 or $9,000, but all of a sudden over the next 10 or 15 years, inflation goes crazy, and now we're seeing 7, 8, 9% inflation on a yearly basis over the next 10 years. I mean, you could be seeing your expenses go up from $10,000 to $30,000 a month in the next 10 years. You see, if you go back and you remember Jimmy Carter era, you were seeing inflation at 14, 15, 16% back at that time. So you want to make sure if inflation goes crazy over a period of time, how is that going to affect your retirement? And does that mean that now you're going to have to pull more money from your investments in your retirement? And could that cause the money to run out even faster? So by the way, I created a free downloadable PDF that walks you through all of the 6 main tax risks that people have during retirement and exactly what solutions you can use to help you solve those problems. Because as we enter retirement, you want to make sure that you have a strategy in place for all of these possible risks. So if you want to get that free downloadable PDF, you can text me the word money to 786-807-7001. As soon as you send me that text, I'll text you right back a downloadable link where you can download that PDF. And now you know the tax risks that you might run into and what are solutions that you can use to help you solve those problems. A way that you can solve this problem of inflation, and it's not 100% bulletproof, but is you want to make sure that your money is invested in environments that they go up in value as inflation occurs. So typically things like stocks and real estate or treasury inflation protected securities, which are called TIPS, these also can go up in value if inflation is also going up at the same time. And this is also a way that you can protect your wealth if inflation goes crazy. Now, here's another one that I deal with on a regular basis here at our office. We mainly manage money for a lot of families. And a lot of people, as they're entering retirement, they might have money inside the stock market, like the S&P 500 or the Dow Jones or the NASDAQ, or they might have individual stocks. And so as you're taking money from these investments during retirement, you also have to think about something called volatility risk. And what that means is that, as you know, stocks, they go up and they go down and they go up and they go down. But if you're retired and you're not working and you're living off of your investments and you're having to sell investments at different periods of time, if we go through a very big market downturn where the market drops 40 or 50% and it takes 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years for it to recover, that means during those 5 years of retirement, you might have to be selling those stocks, selling those investments at losses. And that can be a very dangerous place to be in when you're in the stage of retirement, because if you're retired and you're not working and you need $100,000 a year to pay your bills, well, where do you pull the $100,000 a year from? If your stocks are down 50%, you have no other choice but to sell your stocks, meaning you're selling now at a loss, and it might be 3, 4, 5 years before it ever recovers. So you want to make sure that you're thinking of what happens if a bad event like that does happen. So a way that you can solve that problem is by creating what's called a bucket strategy. We've talked about it in previous videos, where if you have a bucket ready to go for when things go really bad, when the stock market does go down, now you have another bucket that you can pull from while you let this other bucket come back and recover. So the fourth risk is something called healthcare risk, because as we get to later stages in our life, like our late 70s and 80s, our health starts getting affected. And when our health starts getting affected, now, well, who's going to take care of us when we can't take care of ourselves? Who's going to take care of us when we can't bathe on our own or get dressed on our own or go to the bathroom on our own? And maybe you might say, well, my spouse is going to take care of me. Well, what happens if your spouse is not there when you need them the most? Or maybe you might say, well, my children are going to take care of me. Do you really want to put that burden onto your children? So as you're thinking of this topic of retirement, you know, retirement sometimes seems like a very beautiful stage of life where you're enjoying, you're traveling, you're seeing all your friends and you're traveling around the world. But you also want to think of like, hey, what happens when I'm 81 years old and I don't remember what my name is? Who's going to take care of me? And so it's not just knowing who's going to take care of you, is that going to cost us money? Because if now you need to hire someone to take care of you 24 hours a day, that might be an additional $8,000, $12,000, $16,000 expense that you might now have to add on to your overall budget during that stage of life. And you also want to think of your spouse in that scenario, right? Because imagine you get sick, but then that causes all of the money of the family to be wiped out. And then when you pass away, your spouse is left with nothing because you spent all the money on your medical attention. So as you're thinking of this topic of retirement, that's another big risk that can destroy your entire wealth and also affect your family at a later stage of their retirement. So a way that you can solve this is we highly recommend, usually all of our clients, to set up something called a health savings account. So it's an investment account that you can deposit money on a monthly or yearly basis. Normally when you're married, it's somewhere around $8,000 per year. But the beautiful thing about it is any deposit that you make, you get a tax write-off, so you don't have to pay any taxes on it. And then at the same time, you can still invest it, so that money's still growing. And then later on in life, when you're in your 70s and 80s and you need to pay for medical expenses, you can use that account to pay for the medical expenses. But the beautiful thing is that all of the growth that account had for the next 10, 15, 20 years, as you pull out the money, you don't have to pay any taxes on it. And another thing you can consider is what are called hybrid life insurance policies, where they serve as life insurance policies, but they also have riders attached to it that serve like a long-term care policy, and it can help you cover some of your expenses as you're entering retirement and as you're at that later stage of retirement where you really need long-term care. Or maybe you want to look into what are called long-term care policies as well. Those can be a little bit more expensive, but you want to make sure that you have a strategy in place for these potential risks. Another area is what we call behavioral risk. Now, you might think that you don't have this problem, because I think we all think we don't have this problem, that we don't misbehave. I think we can all agree that there's been different stages in our life where we have probably misbehaved when it comes to our spending pattern. And this can happen very easily during retirement. The way I look at retirement is retirement are like permanent weekends. And if you think of how much money you spend on a weekend, most of us probably spend more money on weekends than we do on weekdays. Why? Because weekends we're not working. Weekends we are probably spending time with our family, with our loved ones, with our friends. And during that time, we normally go out. We go shopping, right? If you're working every single day, you're probably not on Amazon shopping throughout the day. Hopefully not. But those are things we need to be thinking about. And so as we're entering the stage of retirement, ask yourself, hey, am I going to be spending money too much during retirement? Because if one crazy thing happens, like maybe your son or your daughter needs money out of the blue and you need to go give them $40,000 or $50,000 for something that they need, like maybe they're going to buy a house and you want to go give them that money and you don't really think of the consequence on how that's going to affect you, that can destroy your retirement. And I see it happening with so many parents that, they want to help their children and they want to pay for their weddings. They want to pay for their kids' college debt off. And they want to do all these things, which, by the way, there's nothing wrong with wanting to do it. The problem is that sometimes by doing those things, you're also hurting your own retirement. And then later on, when you're 78 years old, you're like, man, why did I run out of money so quickly? Well, it was because of the decisions that we made early in our retirement that caused that event to happen. And the sixth area is what we call tax risk. You see, tax risk means that, as we know, the national debt has gone completely out of hand. We're sitting at almost $40 trillion in national debt right now. And what that means is that someone's going to have to pay that debt off. And that someone's probably going to be you and I. And now the question is, well, how is that going to be paid off? Well, the government has the full right, the full control to change taxes at any point in the future. And if we're entering retirement and the government decides that they're going to increase taxes, and you might have a 401k or an IRA or a 403b, you see all of those accounts, those are taxed when you take out the money. So if the government decides to change tax brackets and change tax rates, that can drastically affect that every dollar that you pull out of those accounts, maybe right now they're getting taxed maybe 10 or 12%, but maybe in the future, that same dollar that you're taking out, you might be being charged 20 or 25%. So as you're entering retirement, you want to make sure that you're thinking of, wait a second, what happens if the government decides to increase taxes, and now for every dollar that I take out, I'm not getting 88 cents. Now I'm only getting probably 74 cents or 75 cents. That means that now you need to withdraw more out so that you can net more in your hands. So these are mainly what we call the 6 retirement risks that people have. But there is one final bonus, and it's unexpected life events. And what do I mean by that? Well, maybe you or your spouse can pass away. That can destroy the remaining spouse financially, because sometimes Social Security can be wiped out. Or if there's a pension involved, that pension can also be gone. Or if a divorce occurs, that can also create a big problem if you divorce right at the beginning of retirement or in the middle of retirement, right? Imagine that now you have to grab the money and it has to be split. And now each one of you have to go to your own separate ways and you each have to have your own house. That can also destroy your retirement. So there's other elements that need to be factored in. So the most important takeaway out of this conversation is the family that I met with that had over $2 million saved up, they thought they were perfectly fine. But when you start factoring all of these other risks that could happen, they're highly unlikely to happen, that we see, 15 or 20% inflation, or we see the stock market to drop 40 or 50% and it takes years before it recovers. But these negative and these potential risks can destroy a person's retirement. And so you want to make sure that you're factoring all of these elements in. So what we always like to do in our planning as we're going through with a family, we always want to make sure, hey, what happens if taxes go up 10 or 15%? Hey, what happens if the stock market drops? We always want to factor these elements in the planning to make sure that if things do go bad, how is that going to affect your retirement?